Marcus Johnson pulled his worn blanket tighter around his shoulders as the cold Chicago wind whipped through the underpass he now called home. At 43, this wasn't where he had imagined his life would be. The cardboard box beneath him crinkled as he shifted his weight, trying to find a more comfortable position against the concrete wall. 5 years had passed since the 2008 financial crisis had taken everything from him. First his construction company, then his savings, his house, and finally his pride. The memories of his past life felt like scenes from someone else's movie. The three-bedroom house in the suburbs, weekend barbecues with neighbors, and his daughter's high school graduation. Each morning, Marcus would wait before sunrise, folding his blanket neatly and storing it in his waterproof bag, one of his most prized possessions. He had a routine, something he clung to as a reminder of his former life. First, he would walk to St. Mary's Church, where Sister Catherine would offer him a cup of hot coffee and sometimes a warm bagel. "Good morning, Marcus." Sister Catherine greeted him that crisp autumn morning, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Would you mind helping James set up the breakfast tables today? His arthritis is acting up again." Marcus nodded, grateful for the chance to be useful. James was another regular at the church's breakfast program, an elderly veteran who had been homeless for over a decade. Despite his own circumstances, Marcus found purpose in helping others who were struggling even more than him. As he set up the folding tables, Marcus remembered his first night on the streets. The shame, the fear, the disbelief that this was now his reality. But over time, he had discovered an unexpected community among Chicago's homeless population. They looked out for each other, shared information about safe sleeping spots, and warned one another about dangerous areas or aggressive police officers. By mid-morning, Marcus made his way to Michigan Avenue, where he would spend hours watching the endless stream of people rushing past. Businessmen in expensive suits, tourists with shopping bags, young professionals glued to their phones, all of them avoiding eye contact with the man sitting quietly on the sidewalk. Some days, you would find odd jobs, helping unload trucks behind restaurants or clearing snow from sidewalks in winter. The restaurant owners knew him as reliable and honest, sometimes rewarding him with leftover food at the end of the day. Marcus never begged. Instead, he would sit with a simple cardboard sign that read, "Veteran, will work for food." That afternoon, he spotted a familiar face approaching. Old Pete, a fellow homeless man who had shown Marcus the ropes when he first ended up on the streets. Pete's weather-beaten face broke into a toothless grin as he shuffled closer. "Marcus, my friend, got something for you," Pete wheezed, pulling a slightly squashed sandwich from his coat pocket. "Lady at the deli was throwing these out. Still good, just a bit smooshed." Marcus smiled, breaking the sandwich in half and sharing it with Pete. They sat together, watching the world rush by, sharing stories and news from the streets. Pete told him about a new shelter opening up near Navy Pier, and Marcus shared information about a construction site that was hiring day laborers. As evening approached, Marcus made his way to the public library, his sanctuary during operating hours. Here, he could escape the cold, use the bathroom, and most importantly, check his email on the public computers. He still maintained an email address, clinging to this small connection to the modern world. Every few days, he would look for job postings and send out applications, though most went unanswered. In the quiet of the library, Marcus opened a worn notebook, another prized possession. Inside were phone numbers, addresses, and most precious of all, photos of his daughter, Sarah. She was in college now, working part-time to pay for her education. He hadn't spoken to her in 3 years, too ashamed to let her see what had become of her father. As the library's closing time approached, Marcus gathered his belongings and headed back to his spot under the bridge. The temperature was dropping, and the weather report he'd seen on the library's computer predicted rain. He would need to find some extra cardboard to keep his blanket off the wet ground. Despite everything, Marcus maintained his dignity and his humanity. He kept himself as clean as possible, using public restrooms to wash up, and always treated others with respect, whether they were fellow homeless individuals or the people who pretended not to see him. In his heart, he held on to hope that someday, somehow, his life would change. He just never expected that change would come in the form of a police captain's son and a dangerous encounter with the Chicago Mafia. The evening started like any other for Marcus. Dark clouds had been threatening rain all day, and he needed to find better shelter than his usual spot under the bridge. Navy Pier seemed promising. There were several covered areas where the security guards usually looked the other way if you stayed quiet and didn't cause trouble. Marcus walked along the pier, his worn backpack containing everything he owned slung over his shoulder. The tourist crowds had thinned due to the weather, leaving only a few determined visitors taking photos of the choppy lake waters. The smell of deep dish pizza and caramel popcorn from the nearby shops made his stomach growl, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since the shared sandwich with old Pete. Finding a sheltered corner near some storage units, Marcus settled down for the night. He pulled out his blanket and positioned himself till he could see both the main walkway and the service road behind the buildings. Years on the street had taught him to always be aware of his surroundings. Around 9:30 p.m., a black SUV with tinted windows caught his attention. It drove past slowly, then circled back 5 minutes later. Something about it made Marcus uneasy. He'd seen enough suspicious activity during his time on the streets to know when something wasn't right. The SUV parked in the service road, its headlights off. Two men got out, both wearing dark jackets. They looked ordinary enough, but Marcus noticed they kept scanning the area nervously. Years of observing people had made him good at reading body language. Then he saw the boy. He couldn't have been more than 15, walking alone while typing on his phone. The boy's expensive jacket and confident stride marked him as someone who'd never had to worry about walking alone at night. Marcus recognized the type. Probably lived in one of those fancy high-rises along Lakeshore Drive. Everything happened fast after that. The two men emerged from the shadows, grabbing the boy before he could react. One hand clamped over his mouth, muffling his screams. The boy's phone clattered to the ground, the screen cracking on impact. Marcus's heart raced. He could walk away. That's what street survival usually demanded. Don't get involved. Don't draw attention. But something about the boy's desperate struggles struck a chord. He thought of his own daughter, how he would want someone to help her if she was in trouble. Moving silently, skills learned from years of staying invisible, Marcus followed the SUV. He picked up the boy's dropped phone, noticing the background photo showed the kid with a woman in a police uniform. The screen was cracked but still worked, showing multiple missed calls from Mom. The SUV drove through the quiet streets of Chicago, finally stopping at an abandoned warehouse in an industrial area near the river. Marcus knew this area well. It was where many homeless people sought shelter during winter. The building they chose had been empty for years, its windows boarded up, graffiti covering its walls. Marcus watched as they forced the struggling boy inside. He heard one of the men say, "Call the captain. Tell her we got her kid. She'll learn to keep her nose out of our business now." The pieces clicked together in Marcus's mind. The police uniform in the phone's photo, the mention of a captain. This was a cop's kid. These men weren't just ordinary criminals. This was something bigger. Finding a safe observation spot, Marcus studied the building's layout. He knew these old warehouses well. Many had basement access through coal chutes, a remnant from when the buildings were heated by coal furnaces. If this one had a similar setup, it might provide a way in. As rain finally began to fall, Marcus made his decision. He couldn't just walk away. The boy's scared face reminded him too much of his own child. But he had to be smart about this. Direct confrontation wasn't an option. He was one homeless man against armed kidnappers. Marcus pulled out his notebook and began sketching the building's layout, marking possible entry points. He counted 4 men total, taking turns guarding the entrance. They were professional, organized. This wasn't a random kidnapping. This was planned. As midnight approached, Marcus began to formulate a plan. He would need to be careful, patient, and smart. One wrong move could get both him and the boy killed. But for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. Tomorrow, he would attempt something that could either end in tragedy or become a turning point in his life. Either way, he knew he had to try. Marcus spent the early morning hours studying the warehouse's patterns. He noticed the guards changed shifts every 4 hours, and there was a 10-minute window when they seemed less alert, usually around meal times. The basement coal chute he'd spotted was partially hidden behind overgrown bushes, a potential way in that the kidnappers might have overlooked. Around dawn, he made his move. The morning guard was eating a sandwich, his attention focused on his phone. Marcus crawled through the wet bushes, his heart pounding so hard he feared it might give him away. The coal chute's rusty cover lifted with a gentle pull. Years of helping maintenance workers in exchange for food had taught him how to move things silently. Inside the basement was dark and damp. Marcus's eyes adjusted slowly as he crept forward, thankful for his knowledge of these old buildings. He could hear voices above, men laughing and talking about a basketball game. Then he heard something else, muffled crying coming from behind a stack of old crates. Tommy Reynolds sat on a dirty mattress, his hands tied behind his back, tear streaks marking his dusty face. When he saw Marcus, his eyes went wide with fear. Marcus quickly pressed a finger to his lips, then whispered, "I'm here to help. I found your phone. Your mom's a police captain, right?" The boy nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Marcus worked quickly to untie him, using skills he'd learned in the Marines years ago. "I'm Marcus," he whispered. "We need to be very quiet. Can you do that?" Tommy nodded again, rubbing his sore wrists. "They want my mom to stop investigating someone called DeMarco," he whispered back. "They keep making phone calls to her." Marcus's blood ran cold. The DeMarco family, even homeless people knew that name. They controlled much of Chicago's underground, and they weren't known for mercy. This situation was even more dangerous than he'd thought. Footsteps above made them both freeze. Someone was walking directly overhead. Marcus guided Tommy toward the coal chute, moving slowly to avoid making any noise on the debris-covered floor. Each step felt like an eternity. Just as they reached the chute, a door upstairs slammed. "Check on the kid," a voice commanded. They had minutes, maybe seconds. "You first," Marcus whispered, helping Tommy into the chute. "When you get out, run to the street. Don't stop, don't look back. I'll be right behind you." Tommy hesitated. "But..." "Go," Marcus urged, hearing footsteps on the basement stairs. Tommy scrambled through the chute just as a beam of flashlight illuminated the basement. Marcus pulled the cover partially closed behind him and pressed himself into a dark corner, praying the guard wouldn't notice the slightly moved cover. The guard walked around, his flashlight beam sweeping the basement. "What the hell?" he suddenly shouted. "The kid's gone." Chaos erupted above. Marcus heard running footsteps and shouting. Using the confusion, he slipped through the cold chute and emerged into the morning light. Tommy was nowhere in sight. Good, he followed instructions and run. Marcus moved quickly but carefully away from the warehouse, using alleys and shadows, skills learned from years of avoiding trouble on the streets. He heard car engines starting, tires squealing. The kidnappers would be searching. 3 blocks away, he spotted Tommy hiding behind a dumpster, shaking but unhurt. "You did good, kid," Marcus said softly, approaching slowly to avoid scaring him. "But we're not safe yet. They'll be looking for us." "Why did you help me?" Tommy asked, his voice trembling. Marcus thought about his own daughter, about all the times he'd wished he could help her but couldn't. "Because it was right," he said simply. "Now come on. We need to keep moving." They couldn't go to the police station yet. The DeMarco family had eyes everywhere. They couldn't risk using phones. They might be tracked. They would need to stay hidden, stay moving, and find a way to contact Captain Reynolds securely. As they moved through the awakening city, Marcus realized his life would never be the same after today. He just made enemies of one of Chicago's most dangerous crime families. But looking at the grateful trust in Tommy's eyes, he knew he'd made the right choice. Now they just had to survive long enough to get Tommy back to his mother. The next 48 hours became a dangerous game of hide and seek through Chicago's streets. Marcus and Tommy moved carefully through the city, using every trick Marcus had learned during his years of homelessness. They slept in abandoned buildings, used back alleys, and avoided security cameras. "My mom must be going crazy," Tommy said as they shared a loaf of bread Marcus had gotten from Sister Catherine's church. They were hiding in an old boiler room, one of Marcus's emergency shelters. "She's probably got the whole police force looking for me." Marcus nodded, keeping his voice low. "That's what worries me. The DeMarco family will be watching the police. We need to be smart about how we contact her." Through snippets of overheard conversations and glimpses of news on public televisions, they learned that the city was indeed searching for Tommy Reynolds. His face was everywhere, on store windows, bus stops, and digital billboards. Captain Sarah Reynolds had made an emotional plea on television, begging for information about her son. What worried Marcus more were the other people searching. Men in expensive suits driving black SUVs, asking questions in neighborhoods where questions weren't usually asked. The DeMarco family was hunting them too. "Tell me about your mom," Marcus said, trying to keep Tommy's spirits up during their second night in hiding. They were in a different shelter now, an abandoned office building Marcus knew well. "She's the toughest person I know," Tommy said proudly. "She started as a beat cop and worked her way up. Dad died when I was little, so it's just been us. She's been investigating these corruption cases lately, working really late." Marcus listened, thinking carefully. These corruption cases, they involved the DeMarco family. Tommy nodded. "I heard her on the phone once. Something about construction contracts and dirty money. She was getting close to something big." The conversation was interrupted by voices outside. Both froze as flashlight beams swept past their hiding spot. Marcus recognized one of the voices. It belonged to one of the kidnappers. "They said the kid's been spotted in this area," the voice said. "Boss wants him found before he talks to anyone." Marcus and Tommy stayed absolutely still until the voices faded. Once they were gone, Marcus made a decision. "We need to move. They're getting too close." They slipped out into the night, staying in shadows. But as they turned a corner, they came face to face with a police patrol car. The officer inside immediately recognized Tommy from the missing person alerts. "Hold it right there," the officer shouted, jumping out with his gun drawn. "Step away from the boy." Tommy quickly stepped in front of Marcus. "No, he saved me. He helped me escape." More patrol cars arrived within minutes. Marcus found himself surrounded by officers, their guns pointed at him. He stayed very still, hands raised, knowing one wrong move could be fatal. Then a black SUV screeched to a halt nearby. Captain Sarah Reynolds burst out, running toward her son. "Tommy," she cried, embracing him tightly. "Mom, he saved me," Tommy said quickly, pointing at Marcus. "The DeMarco family had me. They wanted you to stop investigating them, but Marcus got me out." Captain Reynolds turned to Marcus, really seeing him for the first time. Her eyes took in his homeless appearance, but also the way he held himself, straight-backed, dignified despite the circumstances. "Lower your weapons," she commanded her officers. "This man saved my son." As the guns lowered, she approached Marcus. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. "We've been searching everywhere." "Who are you?" "Just someone who couldn't walk away," Marcus replied quietly. But in the age of computers and databases, just someone didn't stay anonymous for long. Within hours, Captain Reynolds had Marcus's full history. Former Marine, successful construction business owner, family man, before the 2008 crash took everything. As they sat in the police station's interview room, Captain Reynolds looked at Marcus with new understanding. "You risked your life for my son," she said. "Why?" Marcus thought about his own daughter, about the years of regret and shame. "Because every child deserves to go home to their parent," he answered softly. What Marcus didn't know was that this moment would mark the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The DeMarco family wasn't finished with them yet, but for the first time in years, he had allies in his corner. The police station buzzed with activity as detectives and officers worked to document everything about Tommy's kidnapping. Marcus sat in Captain Reynolds' office, feeling strangely out of place in the comfortable chair. His worn clothes and weathered appearance contrasted sharply with the professional environment around him. Detective Williams entered with a thick file in his hands. "Captain, we've completed the background check on Mr. Johnson." He placed the file on her desk, and Marcus noticed his own younger face staring back from an old military ID photo. "Marcus Johnson," Detective Williams read aloud. "United States Marine Corps, 1995 to 2003. Honorable discharge. Bronze Star recipient for actions in Afghanistan." He paused, looking at Marcus with newfound respect. "After service, you started Johnson Construction Company in Chicago. The company was quite successful until 2008. Marcus stared at his hands, memories flooding back. "We had 50 employees at our peak," he said quietly. "Good people, families to support. When the crash hit, I tried to keep everyone on as long as I could. Used my savings, took out loans, sold everything." Captain Reynolds listened intently as Marcus's story unfolded. He told them about the domino effect, how trying to save his company had cost him his home, his marriage, and eventually his relationship with his daughter Angela. She was in high school when it all fell apart. Marcus explained, his voice rough with emotion. "I couldn't face her after I lost everything. Couldn't bear to see the disappointment in her eyes. So I just disappeared. We can find her, Captain Reynolds offered gently. She might want to know you're alive. Marcus shook his head. She's better off without. Dad. The voice from the doorway made Marcus freeze. He turned slowly to see a young woman standing there, her hand covering her mouth in shock. Detective Williams had quietly made some calls while running the background check. Angela Johnson was now 25, but Marcus would have known her anywhere. She had her mother's eyes and his determined chin. She worked as a nurse at Chicago General Hospital, the detective had discovered. Angela, Marcus whispered, unable to move from his chair. The shame of his appearance, of what he'd become, paralyzed him. But Angela didn't hesitate. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and threw her arms around him. We thought you were dead, she sobbed into his shoulder. Mom hired a private investigator, but they couldn't find you. Why did you leave us? Marcus held his daughter for the first time in years, his own tears falling freely. I'm so sorry, he managed to say. I thought you'd be better off without me. I'd failed at everything. You didn't fail. Angela pulled back to look at him. You tried to save everyone's jobs. Mom told me everything after I got older. We just wanted you back. Captain Reynolds quietly ushered everyone else out of the office, giving father and daughter privacy. Through the glass walls, she watched as years of pain and misunderstanding began to heal. Later, when Angela had to leave for her hospital shift, she made Marcus promise to meet her for dinner the next day. After she left, he sat in stunned silence, still processing the whirlwind of emotions. Your daughter never gave up on you, Captain Reynolds said, returning to her office. And now you've given my son back to me. I'd say that makes us family of sorts. She pulled out a business card and handed it to Marcus. This is Jason Chen. He runs a veteran support program. Housing, job training, whatever you need to get back on your feet. She held up her hand when Marcus started to protest. You're not just some homeless man anymore, Marcus. You're a key witness in a major case against the DeMarco family, and more importantly, you're a hero who saved my son. Marcus looked at the card in his hands, then at the captain. The DeMarcos won't stop coming after Tommy, he warned. Not until they're sure he can't testify about the kidnapping. Captain Reynolds nodded grimly. That's why I need your help. You know the streets in a way my officers don't. You have connections in the homeless community. Will you help us build this case? Marcus thought about Angela, about Tommy, about all the years he'd spent believing he had nothing left to offer the world. Maybe it was time to prove himself wrong. Yes, he said firmly. I'll help. The downtown Chicago police station became Marcus's new base of operations. Clean-shaven and wearing donated clothes, he looked different from the homeless man who'd wandered the streets just days ago. Captain Reynolds had given him a small office next to hers, where maps of the city covered the walls. The homeless community sees everything, Marcus explained to the investigation team. We're invisible to most people, so they don't guard their actions around us. He marked locations on the map where his former street companions had reported seeing DeMarco family activities. Old Pete had been especially helpful once Marcus explained the situation. The elderly homeless man had been keeping a mental record of suspicious activities near the docks for years. Just in case it ever mattered, he told Marcus with a toothless grin. 3 warehouses, Marcus pointed on the map. The homeless avoid them because DeMarco's men chase everyone away. They unload trucks there late at night, but nothing ever comes out during the day. Detective Williams nodded, taking notes. Matches our suspicions about their smuggling operations, but we need solid evidence. Captain Reynolds studied the map thoughtfully. The construction contracts Tommy mentioned. They're connected to these locations. The DeMarcos have been laundering money through fake construction projects. Marcus knew construction. Before losing everything, he dealt with every major builder in Chicago. I can spot a fake construction site easily, he said. Real sites have patterns. Material deliveries, worker shifts, inspection schedules. If they're faking it, they'll make mistakes. The investigation grew larger each day. Marcus's knowledge of the streets proved invaluable. He knew which restaurant owners might have been pressured into paying protection money, which storage facilities were really fronts for illegal operations, and most importantly, which homeless people had witnessed crucial activities. One evening, as Marcus was reviewing security camera footage, Angela brought him dinner at the station. She'd been visiting regularly, helping him adjust to his new life. "Dad," she said, watching him work, "Mom wants you to know you're welcome to move in with her and my stepdad. You don't have to stay at the veterans' shelter." Marcus smiled at his daughter's concern. "The shelter's good for me right now. Jason Chen's program is helping lots of us get back on our feet. Plus, I need to stay focused on this case." A knock on the door interrupted them. Captain Reynolds entered, looking worried. "We got a problem. Someone's been threatening our witnesses. 3 homeless people who gave statements have been attacked." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "Old Pete? He's safe. We moved him to a secure location this morning, but the DeMarcos are getting nervous. They know we're building a case." The next few days were tense. Marcus worked with the police to move vulnerable witnesses to safe houses. He used his street connections to spread warnings through the homeless community. The DeMarcos had resources, but they couldn't intimidate people they couldn't find. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A young homeless woman named Maria approached Marcus one morning. She'd been sleeping near one of the suspicious warehouses and had recorded something on her phone. "I always record when I see scary stuff," she explained. "Never know when you might need proof." The video showed DeMarco's men unloading crates at 3 a.m., but more importantly, it captured a conversation between 2 senior family members, discussing their plans to pressure Captain Reynolds through her son. "This is it," Captain Reynolds said, reviewing the footage. "Combined with Tommy's testimony and our financial investigation, we can bring down their whole operation." But Marcus noticed her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. The pressure of the investigation and the recent threats were taking their toll. "Sarah," he said, using her first name for the first time, "they're still watching Tommy, aren't they?" She nodded. "My sister's staying with him at a safe house upstate, but I'm worried it's not enough." Marcus thought about the fear in Tommy's eyes during their 2 days on the run. No child should have to live like that. No mother should have to fear for her child's safety. "Then let's finish this," he said firmly. "The DeMarcos think they own these streets, but they don't. The people they look down on, the ones they think don't matter, were going to be their downfall." Captain Reynolds straightened in her chair, drawing strength from his determination. The final phase of their investigation was about to begin, and this time, the DeMarco family wouldn't see it coming. 6 months after Tommy's rescue, Marcus stood in front of a small crowd at the Chicago Veterans Support Center. The local media had gathered to cover the opening of a new housing program for homeless veterans, and Marcus was the star of the show. "Every person deserves a second chance," he said into the microphones, his voice steady and confident. "Sometimes you just need someone to believe in you." He glanced at Captain Reynolds, who stood proudly in the audience with Tommy beside her. The DeMarco case had made headlines across the city. With evidence from the homeless community and Marcus's detailed knowledge of construction fraud, the police had built an ironclad case. Most of the family's leadership now sat in federal prison, their empire of corruption crumbling. After the ceremony, Marcus walked through the new facility with Angela. The building had been one of the warehouses seized from the DeMarco family, now transformed into temporary housing for veterans struggling to get back on their feet. "Remember when you used to take me to construction sites when I was little?" Angela asked, touching the freshly painted walls. "You'd explain how everything worked, how you were building something that would help people." Marcus nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "I never thought I'd be building again, but this is better than anything I did before." The center was his new purpose. After the DeMarco case, job offers had poured in from construction companies wanting to hire him as a consultant. But Marcus had a different vision. He'd approached the city with a plan to help homeless veterans, using his construction knowledge and street experience to create something unique. The program didn't just offer beds, it provided job training, mental health support, and most importantly, a community. Marcus had hired several of his former homeless friends as staff members. Old Pete worked as a night security guard, his street wisdom proving invaluable. "Mr. Johnson," a voice called out. A young veteran named Mike rushed up to them. 6 weeks ago, he'd been sleeping under bridges. Now, clean-shaven and wearing work clothes, he looked like a different person. "I got the job at Henderson Construction. I start Monday." Marcus hugged the young man, genuinely happy for his success. "See, I told you they'd be crazy not to hire you." Later that evening, Marcus sat in his small but comfortable apartment above the center. The walls were decorated with photos: Angela's nursing school graduation, Tommy's latest baseball game, and a group picture of the center's first successful residents. His phone buzzed with a text from Captain Reynolds. "Turn on Channel 5 News." Marcus flicked on the TV to see his own face on the screen. The reporter was discussing his remarkable journey from homeless veteran to community leader. The story mentioned his role in the DeMarco case, but focused more on his work with veterans. "Mr. Johnson's program has already helped 30 veterans find housing and employment," the reporter said. "City officials are calling it a model for other cities to follow." There was a knock at his door. Angela entered with take-up containers. "Thought we could have dinner while watching you become famous," she teased. They sat together on his couch, sharing Chinese food and watching the news story. The reporter interviewed several program residents, each crediting Marcus with changing their lives. "You know," Angela said softly, "Mom would be proud of you." Marcus thought of his ex-wife, who had remarried years ago. They'd spoken briefly after he reconnected with Angela. The conversation had been awkward but healing, both acknowledging past mistakes and finding peace. "I'm just trying to do right by people now," he replied. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Jason Chen from the Veteran Support Program. "State funding approved. We can open 2 more centers." Marcus smiled, showing Angela the message. Everything was falling into place. The program was growing, helping more people than he ever imagined possible. His own construction consulting work provided additional income, and he'd even started teaching weekend classes on basic construction skills to program residents. Looking around his apartment, at his daughter beside him, at the evidence of his new life, Marcus felt a deep sense of peace. His journey from successful businessman to homeless veteran to community leader had taught him valuable lessons about humanity, humility, and hope. "Ready to help me plan the next center?" he asked Angela. She smiled, pulling out her notebook. "Always, Dad, always." Here's part 8. Full circle, in approximately 780 words, using simple English in third-person style. 2 years had passed since the rainy night when Marcus Johnson first spotted a black SUV at Navy Pier. Standing at a podium in City Hall, he could hardly believe how much his life had changed. "Today, we're not just opening our 5th Veterans Center," Marcus announced to the gathered crowd. "We're changing how Chicago helps its homeless community." He gestured to the group of people seated behind him. Former homeless individuals now employed as program coordinators, counselors, and facility managers. Captain Sarah Reynolds, recently promoted to police commissioner, sat in the front row with Tommy, now a confident high school junior. Next to them was Angela, who had helped develop a medical outreach program for the centers. Old Pete, wearing a clean security uniform, beamed proudly from his seat. "2 years ago, I was invisible," Marcus continued. "Just another homeless man on the streets. But someone saw me, really saw me, and that changed everything." He looked at Tommy, who grinned back. The program had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a single shelter had evolved into a comprehensive support network. The centers now offered job training, medical care, mental health services, and most importantly, hope. Over 300 veterans had found homes and jobs through the program, with similar initiatives starting in other cities. After the ceremony, Marcus walked through the streets of his old neighborhood. He stopped at Sister Catherine's church, where he still volunteered every Sunday. The breakfast program had expanded, now serving as a gateway to connect homeless individuals with support services. "Look who's here," Sister Catherine called out warmly. She was helping a young homeless veteran fill out housing applications. "John, meet Marcus. He used to sit right where you are." Marcus spent time talking with John, sharing his story and offering guidance. These moments meant the most to him, showing others that change was possible, that rock bottom didn't have to be the end. Later that evening, Marcus attended a special dinner at Commissioner Reynolds' house. It had become a monthly tradition, bringing together the unlikely family that had formed from extraordinary circumstances. "Remember when you first brought Dad to family dinner?" Tommy asked Angela as they set the table. He was so nervous he dropped the salad bowl. Everyone laughed, including Marcus. Those early days of adjusting to normal life again had been challenging, but the support of his newfound family had made all the difference. Speaking of family, Angela announced during dinner, "I'm pregnant. You're going to be a grandfather, Dad." Marcus's eyes filled with tears as everyone congratulated Angela and her husband. From losing everything to gaining a grandchild, life had come full circle in ways he never could have imagined. After dinner, Marcus and Commissioner Reynolds stood on her back porch, looking at the Chicago skyline. "The mayor wants to expand the program statewide," she told them. "They're calling it the Johnson Initiative." Marcus shook his head, still uncomfortable with the attention. "It's not about me. It's about all of us who lived on these streets, who know what it's like to be invisible." "That's exactly why it works," she replied. "You never forgot where you came from. You turned your hardest times into hope for others." Back at his apartment above the First Center, Marcus sat at his desk reviewing plans for the next facility. Photos covered his walls, graduation ceremonies from the job training program, residents receiving apartment keys, families reunited. Each picture told a story of transformation. His phone buzzed with a message from one of the program graduates. "Got promoted to site supervisor today. Thanks for believing in me, Marcus." Messages like this arrived almost daily now. Each one reminded him of his own journey, of the night he chose to help a scared teenager instead of walking away. As he got ready for bed, Marcus heard the familiar sounds of the center below, night staff doing their rounds, late arrivals checking in, the quiet hum of a community looking out for its own. He thought about the young man he'd met at Sister Catherine's that morning. 2 years ago, that had been him, lost, invisible, but not beyond hope. Now he had the privilege of showing others the way back. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new stories, new chances to help. But tonight, Marcus Johnson, former businessman, former homeless veteran, now community leader and soon-to-be grandfather, slept soundly, at peace with his place in the world.